So this lesson should be somewhat simple, but basically these are some methods that can be very, very effective at instantly increasing your average risk to reward in an extremely mechanical and systematic manner. And as you can see, all it literally is just refining your entry to be a little bit further within the zone that you're entering within. And that's it. But that can have a massive impact on your results over the long term, because as you can see here, all four of these, I had to count those quickly to double check, all four of these examples are obviously the same price action example, right? It's the same thing, same trade idea, blah, 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 blah. But like, depending on whether you enter on the edge of the zone, right? Stop losses are always behind, they're always in the same area. But whether you enter on the front edge of it or you enter somewhere within is gonna increase your risk to reward significantly, especially when some of these zones can get quite big, okay? So, I mean, they're somewhat self-explanatory, but may as well quickly talk through them. I've just called this edge, entering on the edge of the zone. Now, over the years, I've always referred to this as the distal, the front of a zone, but I've been informed that that's completely wrong. I think the front is supposed to be called the proximal and the back is called the distal. Anyway, I forget it. So I'm going to refer to it as the edge from now on, the front edge, okay? But if you hear us mention distal, you see it in the old content somewhere, this is basically what we're referring to. We mean entering on the front edge of your zone, okay? So that's the most obviously unrefined way of entering on any zone that you draw. Then you simply enter on the 25% of the zone. So the way you can do this here, I'm just using a Fibonacci tool. Okay, so the Fib retracement, you can grab that from up here. And then when you draw it, so for instance, if you draw it like that, double click into it, and then you just click, if you want to enter on 25%, add in the 25% there, okay? And it will come in, and obviously you need to play around with like the background colors and things like that. So it appears when you do it. But essentially what it should look like if you wanted to do this one is, there you go, 0.25. So you have 0, 0.25 and 1. And all that is saying is that you're drawing the 25% section of the box, okay? So you enter there. So it's a little bit more refined than obviously entering on 0%, increases risk reward. Then likewise here, you're just entering on 0.5, right, halfway in the zone. So you're always entering on the EQ. And then this is a slightly different one whereby you just enter on the body candle. So obviously if it's demand, you do the high of the candle, and if it was supply, you would do the low of the candle. This isn't really something I've ever done. When I first ever started using supply and demand, this was actually how I drew supply and demand zones, but I didn't used to enter on them directly. I used to trade in a slightly different way. But yeah, this just may be a way you want to test, because that is where, in theory, the bulk of the orders should be. So some of you might want to test that out. It's just another option. But the key thing, as always, about all of this is we're trying to be consistent and mechanical as always, right? So these are ways in which you do that, right? Sometimes you don't just go, I'm going to kind of enter in the zone a little bit because I want to keep my stop loss a little bit smaller or a little bit bigger or whatever. It's like, no, I always enter on the 25% of the zone, or I always enter on the edge, or I always enter on the EQ. You need to have a rule to decide, how and when you're doing things so you can be consistent. Now, what I will say is always use this as your default when you're starting out, okay? Just enter on the front edge of the zone, okay? And stop loss just behind. And just start off with that. Get consistent with all of the other variables and everything we're trying to do here. And then when you're kind of like, right, now how can I just try and look to refine a little bit more? Then think about this, okay? And go back to all of your old trades or your backtesting data, and literally just have a column, right? And then you can just have all four of these and just go back through and go, okay, what would the result be? Because obviously the more refined you are, your risk to reward goes up, but it's at the expense of potentially not getting tagged in, okay? So you can have more missed trades. So when you test this and when you backtest this, or in anything you're testing and you're collecting data, you can't always just go, well, this is the most profitable set of rules, so I'm going to trade it this way. You also need to take into account, what am I going to be able to execute in the live market consistently? Because if you find that, entering on the EQ gives you your best results when you're backtesting, you might find in the live market, well, you miss 3 or 4 trades in a row where it doesn't quite tag you in. That's going to affect your psychology, right? You're going to get FOMO, and then you might not execute the next trade, or you might start making mistakes. So kind of try and find that happy medium for where you're getting tagged into enough trades that you'll be happy with, and it's still decent risk reward, right? It's always a little bit of a trade-off. But again, main thing, pick something that you're consistent with. We recommend you start with this. This is basically, at the time of recording, this is what I pretty much always use. I always enter on single candle pivot zone, and I pretty much always enter on the edge for the most part, okay? One thing I haven't spoken about here, and it's probably not the best example, but when you get 2 candles like this, or sometimes even 3, and the thrust candle closes above it, okay, so imagine the wick of this candle was a little bit higher. What you may want to do is refine your zone just a little bit higher, okay? So it's like this, so you include both of those candles. Sorry, it keeps disappearing. So when you get the thrust candle that closes above like the 2 or 3 candles to the left, you may want to include that as well, because sometimes price will just tap the top of that and run. But that's just something to keep an eye on, something to test. And again, it's a way of being mechanical, is you're just looking for when the thrust candle closes above the candles to the left, you may want to include both of those as well. So yeah, there's not really too much else I can add here. Start with the left, start with that, get consistent with everything. And if you want to refine a bit more, this is what you can do. But I would highly recommend, if you're going to start doing this, collect data on it and just have columns for each one and just see what works for you. But really have to think about the trade-off between increasing your risk reward and then also missing a lot more trades. But yeah, be consistent with whatever you pick. If you are, some people sometimes do the edge and sometimes do 25% in certain scenarios. But if you're going to chop and change, make sure you have certain rules for when you're going to do that. And I'll leave that up to you. Cool.